Hey guys, George Stoia here with Soonerscoop.com, joined by SEC Commissioner Greg Sankey. Greg, let's just jump into it. Is it starting to feel real a little bit that Oklahoma and Texas are joining the conference next year?
It is, from the point of entry date clarity to starting to see our TV partner producing materials, videos about what the future looks like, to actually have a program in mid-June where we identified that every one of our current 14 members will be playing either Oklahoma or Texas next year, have the schedule, matchups identified. Kind of step by step, it's become more and more real along the way.
Let's go back to when this first came about. What was it about Oklahoma that feels like it's the right fit for the SEC, and kind of take us through what that process was like?
There's a passionate fan base, and we're accustomed to that. A commitment to high-level, national championship caliber sports. In fact, I've kidded Joe and Bob Stoops one time. I'm like, I used to win softball and gymnastics, and stay away from our football championship. So it'll be great to have them with us. But you've seen a continuing commitment to facilities, to high-level support for young people, to educational opportunities at a national championship level, with just a wonderfully passionate fan base. That's consistent with what we represent in the Southeastern Conference.
Obviously, a lot of communication with Joe Castiglione and Joe Harris over the years. What's that been like working with those two guys, and what's that relationship like?
Been very healthy. In fact, making sure, as I explained, I just talked to Joe. I always have to explain which Joe it may have been in that context. But Joe Harris, from first conversation, was highly positive about us as a conference, optimistic about their future as a university. Joe Castiglione, I actually go back and met him when he was at Missouri. I'm certain he doesn't remember it. I was working in the Southland Conference when he moved to Oklahoma. One of my ADs in that conference moved to Missouri, Mike Alden. When I took over, Joe reached out just to say congratulations, and we'd see each other from time to time. And it's been a real joy in many ways to have him in our athletics directors meetings since January of 2022, just to provide his perspective, his wisdom, to help us think about our future as well.
Brent Venables, I don't know how familiar you are with him, but what's your relationship like with him, your impressions of him, and just the football program in general as they head into the SEC next year?
Yeah, I made a visit to Norman last December. It was my first visit to the university campus. Saw Brent's office, and I was like, wow, that's a heck of a head football coach's office. And I saw Brent someplace along the way. It may have been this spring at some encounter, and kind of kidded him about that. I don't know him well. We've met, I think, once or twice. I've watched him from afar. Obviously, when he was at Clemson as defensive coordinator, and you saw championship matchups in football, admired his work. And so I look forward to working with him, getting to know him in a better way. It's interesting. Met Zach Selman right before the expansion. Got to know him a bit more, and now he jumped early to join Mississippi State as their athletics director. So there's a lot of wonderful people at the University of Oklahoma, some of whom I've met. I look forward to touching base with each of them in the months and years ahead.
You said you visited Norman in December. What was that like? What were your impressions of the campus, maybe the facilities and those sorts of things?
I remember seeing all these signs for what is about to be built, which you want a commitment towards high-level facilities because those support young people, and that's what our student athletes are seeking. I had a long opportunity to sit down with both Joe Harris, the president, and Joe Castiglione, and member of President Harris's leadership team, just to talk about where we were, the path forward. At that point, we were still focused on 2025. Went into Oklahoma City, enjoyed a great dinner. Women's basketball coach, Joe and his wife, both Joes and their wives, and some other staff, and just a warmth. And then actually to stay the next day for the game involving University of Arkansas, it was a precursor or a preview, if you will, of what will be a great SEC rivalry in adjacent states. And that's one of the really, really special opportunities to build a rivalry in a bigger way.
Do you remember where you went to dinner in Oklahoma City?
I don't. It was in an older building that had been recrafted, and my memory was focused on the game. I had Dan Leibovitz with me, And afterwards, I had to call back and said I tested positive for COVID a couple of days later. So that dominates my memory. First time that had happened.
Yeah, we'll have to ask Joe Castiglione, but I want to ask you a little bit too about the scheduling. Alabama goes to Oklahoma. I believe Georgia goes to Austin in the first year. Was that something that you guys wanted to see, those two premier programs get to go to Norman and Austin, and also just how did the scheduling come together?
We as a conference started looking at our scheduling approach back in 2018-19, thought about moving away from divisions even as a 14-member conference. We were here in Nashville and presenting a report in March of 20 when everything stopped. We put all of that aside, and when we brought everything off the shelf, we had moved to 16 members. So we did a lot of groundwork about on analytics, predictive analytics, what options did we have. Fast forward, when we adopted the 8-game schedule, one of the first decisions made was, do we want to have Oklahoma and Texas play each of the 14 members? And we had some models where you didn't have that, it would have produced different opponents. Once you made the decision that because it's new, we wanted everybody to have a taste of Oklahoma and Texas, and likewise Oklahoma and Texas to touch as many of our campuses, that started to dictate matchups. And so it was less about matchups and more about the philosophy of why everybody playing Oklahoma and Texas. And when you look at all of the schedules, every one of our 16 schedules has a competitive rigor that I think is unique to this conference.
I know there's been talk about the rivalries and keeping those in place, and I know the scheduling is changing all the time, but do OU and Texas fall in that category of a rivalry that will probably stay forever?
They do, and one of the issues we're confronted with is we have multiple rivalries. Yeah. You look at Oklahoma and Missouri and their history in the Big Eight, that's one that's of interest to us. And the decision between 8 and 9 games is about how many of those games of passion, those real rivalry games that you play on an annual basis, and how many of those are played every other year. And we've decided to stay at 8 for 1 year, needed to onboard in an efficient way, but we got to come to a conclusion on exactly how we want to format our schedule, 8 or 9 games, because that does impact those games of passion.
Lastly, Greg, there's a lot of talk about being SEC ready. I'm wondering, what exactly does that mean? I know it's on the field, the competition is really high, but also off the field, the fan base. And is Oklahoma SEC ready?
Well, the support and the fan base are part of the intrigue, and we wouldn't be in this conversation if the support and the fan base weren't at the SEC level. Our staff has traveled once to Norman to just evaluate game operations. We do have expectations that are different from the Big 12. We also hosted both the Oklahoma and Texas Athletic Department representatives in Birmingham last November to walk through our policies, the way we do things, introduce both senior leadership teams to our staff, and we will continue that process over the next year. We dusted off the playbook from Texas A&M and Missouri entering, and we were successful in a much shorter period of time, and we've used the opportunity over the last few years to orient ourselves in really an intentional way so that come July 1st, 2025, when the SEC lights are fully on in Norman and Austin, everybody's ready to go.
Awesome. Well, Greg, we really appreciate the time. Next year, we'll be talking to you when OU's officially in the conference. Make sure you guys stay on Soonerscoop.com for all of our coverage at SEC Media Days.